Good morning, fellow humans. I'm hoping you're having a wonderful spring day today. I know I'm having a pretty good day, so that's good. This video may be a little bit long, and we're going to introduce a few new elements in terms of technology and presentation. My goal for these things, as I said before, is comprehension and an understanding of this modality of communication between individuals. And I've obviously, like I've said before, I'm a technologist. I understand technology as well as anybody can, and I have been intentionally keeping this channel, whatever you want to call it, as simple and minimalist as possible, because the goal here is to communicate and to connect in a human way. And so I'm really focusing more on the energy that I'm sending out, and kind of I want this to be a conversation, right, where because extemporaneous communication is going to, in my opinion, firstly is a skill which I very much want to foster, but more importantly, like, I think you can't replicate human extemporaneous communication and expression. And so I've been eschewing the polished view, the SEO kind of content. I don't even like that word content, because that's not really my goal. My goal is not to create a product per se. It's to express myself in a way that, like I've said in the past, kind of slips into the zeitgeist, the bedrock of, that I just want to express that I'm here. And so I've been and express my own experiences and my own worldview and my own journey. And that's that's really the focus I have today. And in needing to do so, I need to kind of bring some more elements into, or tools into, how we communicate versus just like sitting here with a webcam. So I've got a few PowerPoint slides. We're gonna try this, and I'm gonna cut some of the videos together so that it works so that I can make it happen. I'm not interested, like I said, in kind of a slick approach where people are, that's not me. It's there, I get it. There's plenty of technology to do it. I'm trying to use the tools that come as stock with the current technology devices. I'm trying very hard not to use a lot of fancy software or techniques, whatever, which is part of what I'm trying to get across. I've talked a little bit about like zeitgeist, the concept of zeitgeist, and we'll define it here in a bit. But in order for communication to happen, there needs to be connection of some kind, right? A shared experience, a shared protocol. That's what building APIs are, right? And like I think I've said in the past, at least on here, that in my view, art is like an API for souls to communicate. You don't necessarily need to understand, and in some cases you shouldn't, right? Because art should be a way of kind of, relating, right? A lower level communication of the spirit, whether that's good or bad, in or out, profane or sacred, whatever. But in order for that type of communication to be built, you have to have you gotta have a Rosetta Stone, right? I've been thinking a lot about this concept when it comes to interpersonal relations, politics, religion, how we as individual conscious humans, and you can debate that, but let's move on, whether we as conscious individuals, how we can communicate better, but also how can we invoke nonverbal communication, and like human, how can we convey the human experience in as raw a format as possible? And that requires an API. That requires us to kind of have a set of terms that we can build on, or have a set of concepts that we can build on. And zeitgeist is kind of, again, we'll talk about that here in a second. But just, I guess, just know that I'm trying really hard to keep this as simple as possible, because I'm not interested in fetishizing this process. I'm interested in, in developing an expression of my journey through life in a way that can be applicable to others. When you think about shared experiences as that connector point, as that Venn diagram, it's kind of a powerful, in my opinion, it's a kind of a powerful construct, especially when you talk about generational experiences. I recently have fallen down a rabbit hole of, for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is my mentor, my brother, my father figure. I don't even know how to quantify him. Rocky was what most people called him. Michael Crowley was his name. And he is really, I don't know how I could communicate what this individual meant to me in a very visceral way, but he had experiences in life that I never will. And those kinds of shared experiences, the shared commonality of the zeitgeist that we could both build on, built an API for communion. I'm not that, he was a baby boomer, and not that far removed, as you'll see here in a second, when we switch to the slides, because I need a visual representation of some of these concepts, I think. We'll see how this goes. But I really kind of have been thinking a lot about his generation and the generation of World War II generation before the baby boomers, and their value systems, their zeitgeist, and again we'll define that here in a second. Their worldview and the power of it, and also the tragedy of it, and as we humans move forward in a temporal way in time and generation, we lose track of a lot of the nuance, of course, of previous generations, previous people, but also the concerns and the emotions of those humans tend to become less and less understandable because we don't have those touch points, because we have fewer and fewer shared experiences, right? And the World War II generation, there aren't that many of them left. And there are some precious, like Rocky was precious to me, and he was a baby boomer. He was, and I'll have plenty of stories about him. He wasn't involved in World War II, but of course his life was shaped by that experience in ways that I don't and cannot understand. But I had other things that he and I could connect with, and we then were able to use that for deeper communication. And his investment in me and my life, his impression of me and in my life, in the way that I view things, in my life experience, was predicated by that. Now, if you take that concept and you extrapolate, you can extrapolate it in a lot of different ways. And before we get into the slides, this is all anecdotal, right? I call myself a pseudo-intellectual, and what I mean by that is I got to be honest about my own thought pattern, my own concepts, my own blind spots. The things that I'm talking about are all debatable, but that's really kind of the point. the point is that in order to move forward and develop the goal that I'm trying to develop, where this is a snapshot of a real human living through these times, we have to have kind of some language so that we can future-proof that commonality, but also so that we can extrapolate backwards and understand, because at the end of the day, people are people, right? I always say with these videos, hello fellow humans, etc. There's a deep, in my opinion and in my perception, there's a deep reason why I use that. And it's not easily quantified and defined. And I have learned compassion in my life. And a part of that compassion is giving people the space, not necessarily the understanding, but to some extent understanding of where those individuals are coming from, the wells of pain, the wells of brilliance, you know, the things that bring us together. And as, in a temporal sense, as we move forward as a species, a lot of things are lost, a lot of nuances lost, etc. And that, of course, that's the function of literature, is to kind of crystallize and encapsulate those kinds of, those I don't know what, those je ne sais quoi, in a fact, and speak to the future. That's literature. You know, during this kind of while I've been thinking about these concepts, I've been going back to my and reading a lot of the classics. I've been focusing on Hemingway. Hemingway is one of my favorite authors. I've talked a little bit about him before, and I've also, you know, there've been a couple of other kind of wells of classic literature that I've been revisiting at this point in my life, because literature and art, definitely, I mean, literature is art, but the really good pieces, the good works, morph with you in time. What does that mean? It means that there are layers of meaning, layers of humanity that you may not understand right now in your life. Maybe you will later. Now I'm in my 50s now, and my life has been well lived as far as I judge, and as far as those that I care about judge. But I have experiences that I bring to any conversation that are unique, but also not repeatable. If we are, you know, if consciousness is, and this is a big topic, but if consciousness is the universe trying to experience itself in finite chunks, right? We're finite creatures. We can only experience so much. We can only develop so much, etc. That's why, you know, that's why giving to the species is important for our progress of wisdom and intellectual and emotional and spiritual growth. You know, our intellectual growth and our capacity for scientific, you know, manipulation of the world around us is, you know, that's the exponential curve that we've talked about before. But humans, I believe, they develop in other ways. Our wisdom has to develop, and it has to develop over time. And that wisdom, in some ways, is rooted by these shared experiences and shared pains that we as humans, as individuals, kind of have a responsibility to push to, or to crystallize the lessons or the experiences. Let's not get too carried away. The experiences, so that they are relevant to the future of Homo sapiens, the future of our species. I think this especially is very relevant today, in that we're at the very cusp of losing huge amounts of human wealth human wisdom, human experiences. These older generations are going away, and because they're dying, and because our world has changed so much with, we're developing in this exponential curve, we have a real possibility of losing ourselves, of losing portions of humanity that I believe are important for our species. And so that's kind of what I'm trying to do with kind of encapsulating my own thoughts in this snapshot in time, which is my life, which is, like this fleeting as a mayfly. If you are not a fool, that's the wrong way to say that. If you are an ignorant individual and you think, for instance, the world is 4,000 years old, it's really difficult to understand time and understand how small you are in the vast scheme, in the timeline of just our species, much less our evolutionary development, much less the little bitty insignificant rock that we're spinning on, much less the life of our sun, etc., extrapolate out. But I believe humans have the capacity to blow the Kardashev scale. And if you don't understand what that is, that's kind of my point, is that like we need to develop a common language, a common kind of understanding. So in conjunction with that, I've built a few slides because I want to focus on, to use kind of as a reference point for the emotional and spiritual and intellectual and physical development and temporal human time that I'm trying to capture. I've got some anecdotal slides that I put together. I'm creating a Venn diagram of generational zeitgeist. And again, when we get to the slides, I'll kind of define what I mean by that. But just as a reference point, and that reference point and the idea of kind of the Venn diagram and where we as humans interact and where there's a common ground, I think that's a powerful anecdotal tool. Now, again, scholars will say that there's no such thing as zeitgeist, especially in a postmodern philosophical world, blah blah blah. But it's a tool, right? A Rosetta Stone, for instance, its value was not necessarily the content, but more the reference, and that's kind of what I'm trying to get across. So if I'm gonna stop this portion. I'm gonna record my presentation of the slide. I'm gonna merge them together in a very crude way because I don't wanna polish this. I'm only going to be using the tools that are easily available. That's kind of those are the constructs of the constraints that I have placed upon myself. Is that I don't want it to be polished and Hollywoodish, etc. I want it to be as raw as possible, as I don't want to get too far away from the typewriter or the pen or the pencil or the charcoal on a cave wall. I don't want to get too far away from that because that's the kind of human continuity that I'm talking about. That's what I am a part of. That's what possibly, if you are a Homo sapien, that's what you are a part of. And to bring us closer together in a practical way, we have to understand that and trust, in some ways we do. We need to trust the legitimacy of other people's experiences, especially if those experiences do not converge with our Venn diagram of life, of existence. Doesn't mean just because, and this is especially true when it comes to discussions about religion and philosophy. I mean, especially in religion, Just because you believe something, and Bob believes something, and Dinesh or whoever believes something, that, and it's completely and wholly outside of your experience, outside of your zeitgeist, it doesn't mean that it's false. It doesn't mean that it's not valuable. It doesn't mean that there are insights. This is why, this is one of the lessons that I learned personally in talking to disenfranchised individuals, especially financially disenfranchised folks. I've said before, my background is, my family profession has been religion for the last 4X generations, other than myself. And I spent a lot of time in, food reach-out services and homeless shelters, and I spent a lot of time with that with my father. That was his. I've got a lot of experiences in that, and that's one of the things that it seems trite in a kind of a. It seems trite to people, but speaking to disenfranchised individuals, treating them and their experiences with a degree of legitimacy, not in a matter of judgment, but in a form of compassion and a form of open desire to learn about other people's experiences, that can unlock huge vistas of beauty and sorrow and wisdom and pain and a greater and deeper understanding of what it means to be human. We talk about politics here a lot. I do, because I'm directly impacted by it, and it's not because, I'm not chasing things. I'm not motivated by things that a lot of other people are. I'm just not. Whether that's good or bad or right or wrong or stupid or fool, whatever. I'm just not. I'm not interested in some things that people hold dear, and vice versa. And that's literally my point. But I want to learn from those individuals. Like the old song, like the old Aerosmith song, learn from fools and from sages. Well, at least that's in their song, right? It's an old phrase. But anyway, enough preamble. Let's jump to the slides, and hopefully I can do this without without having too much of a gigantic video. But at the end of the day, listen, we're talking about concepts that are deep, and there are places for short video formats. There's plenty of places for short conversations. But that's not what I'm bringing to the table. I'm not a TikToker. I'm not a kind of I'm not trying to get some kind of glib phrase that speaks to the current zeitgeist. That's not my intent. So these forms of expression, just like Miles Davis talked about, and there are quite a number of jazz musicians have this. I've read and I've consumed this wisdom. Certain forms of art require effort to glean from, to experience. So I'm not too worried about how long these videos are. I'm not trying to, I know how radio formats work. I know how, the length of the technology on a record player, those constraints created certain fundamental flavors in music, right? I'm not interested in, you get the point. So we're gonna switch to the slides, and then probably at the end of the slides, I'll jump back in for some kind of conclusion, because I'm gonna have to bring this home. I don't know, we'll see. Like I said, this is literally raw, and that's the point. That's the point. We'll cobble this together, and we'll see what happens. All right, I'll see you in a second. Okay, so we're going to define a few terms here before I kind of get into the Venn diagrams themselves and kind of the crux of what I'm trying to communicate. I'm using I'm kind of trying to zoom out as far as I personally can to demonstrate some of these things. And so what do I mean by zeitgeist? You can read the on the slide here, refers to the general culture, etc., a reflection of the dominant ideas, values, beliefs, and moods. Now, it's a distillation in some ways. Like people relate to things in different ways, and it's the distillation of culture that is specifically. Well, yeah, you get the point. I hope you get the point. Originally, the term was basically the spirit of the times. Now, scholars will tell you that this is kind of a crude way of thinking about things, just like scholars will tell you that generational delineations are artificial constructs as well. Of course they are. So are tools like genus and species, right? I mean, so is so are standards of measurement. That's a deeper topic, but you get the point. So basically what I'm trying to do is, and you'll see in the next slide, is I want to build a Venn diagram to kind of extrapolate out at the largest scale possible how connected and disconnected our human experiences are and can be on a generational basis. And then use that kind of structure, that idea of like how little and how much do we actually relate, and what sets of the dominant ideas, what sets of values and beliefs do we in a generational manner share, and what does that kind of mean? How does that analysis kind of inform us about the gaps, about why it's so difficult for sons and fathers to relate, mothers and daughters, etc. I think that this is kind of an important concept today because I'm using these generational zeitgeist idea as a tool, because in reality you can extrapolate or you can analyze this in a lot of different ways. In this kind of similar concept. For instance, what's the common ground between myself and a garbage picker in Mumbai? How can I find a common ground? Now, obviously, those individuals are human and worth as much as I, etc. Or it doesn't really matter. The other way is also applicable, like the rich and powerful. The ruling class, which has always been, with us. A lot of different, where is the common ground in this zeitgeist? So this kind of thought pattern of trying to crystallize what is the common ground between the Venn diagram of people's experiences, I think that it's an interesting concept. So I'm trying to zoom out as big as I can to start with, so that the tool is at least more applicable to a lot of other concepts, a lot of other modalities of human experience. So, when I talk about kind of Venn diagramming out human consciousness, human experience, what's a Venn diagram? Obviously, most people have seen this, but again, I'm trying to build an understanding together, and I can't guarantee that whoever is looking at this is even a Homo sapien, much less know what a Venn diagram is. But canonically, in the current zeitgeist, see, it's a visual tool used to show relationships between sets or groups of things, right? And we've all seen them, right? And I'll show you one. I'll show you three actually here in a second. Now, what I really want to focus on is, the intersection, right? The more that those Venn diagrams the more concepts or the more pieces or constructs, the dominant ideas, values, and beliefs or moods of these generations that they have together, right, in the Euler intersection. That's what it's called. This is actually a Euler diagram, technically, that I'm talking about, but whatever. We really want to focus on like the shared experiences so that we can use as it as a reference point, because what I found in a lot of people's approaches to even something as simple as interacting with a young person, serving them their fast food, the assumptions of common understanding create and breed all kinds of misconceptions and all kinds of artificial problems that don't exist, shouldn't exist, maybe are inevitable that they exist, whatever. And I guess that's my point, a point. Now, before we get into the details of like this generational zeitgeist idea, one of the things that I really want to stress is that if you're one circle of a Venn diagram and someone else is another circle of the Venn diagram and you have absolutely nothing in common other than your Homo sapiens, we will still be able to communicate, right? We'll still find a way if those two parties can find common ground. The problem, though, is that because we are individual conscious individuals, finite instances of an infinite universe, regardless of what you religiously, philosophically, or whatever, regardless of that, that is, in fact, as far as we know, the case. Like, my understanding of my own consciousness and my own existence is completely internal, really, at the end of the day. And so what we're trying to do is to find ways to communicate those individual worlds, those bubbles, those circles of Venn diagrams that are walking around all around us. And we make assumptions based upon many, many things, sociological, physical, intellectual, all kinds of value triggers that we use to try to find a common ground, right? That's kind of the gist of it. But the more removed we are, and the more, in some ways, the more foolish we are, the lower the quality of wisdom that you have, that you've invested in yourself, the harder it is to understand, but more importantly, the harder it is to acknowledge that those individuals in that other circle that you have zero commonality with, other than that you're Homo sapiens, have legitimate experiences. They are legitimate. Their concept of consciousness, their life's experience is as valid as yours, regardless of what value system you internally are using. That person's pain, joy, expression, mental acuity, all of this stuff, it has value. It has value. Now, obviously, if you pull on that thread, you're going to wind up talking about what is consciousness, etc. That's really my point, right? Like this is kind of there's a lot of conversations that I think can be fostered by this kind of idea. So that's these are the terms and definitions, and then that we're going to kind of work with, just with the caveat of understanding that these are, of course, anecdotal, and of course, I'm sure there are plenty of scholars that will tell me that I'm off base. Okay, I get it, and I'm here to learn. I'm here to refine my own viewpoints. But I think that, at least from an anecdotal standpoint, this is a good framework to have some of these conversations, not the least of which, political differences, religious differences, But in this case, I've zoomed out as far as I can in generational or temporal differences, right? So that's what, yeah. So these are the definitions. Sorry for the video being kind of choppy between slides. Whatever. I'm learning how to do this, so I'm sure that we'll. Anyway, let's go on. So the first kind of Venn diagram we're talking about here is kind of the generational shared overlap of the 10, well, or so, most formative, most universal, at least from a U.S. standpoint, and I think from a global standpoint, with U.S. Obviously a U.S.-centric eyes, kind of the difference between the shared experiences between baby boomers and Gen X, which I am Gen X. Now this is the area where both of these groups, the zeitgeist has the most in common, obviously, right? But so all of these kinds of formative experiences that I have had growing up and that I have shared with people like Rocky, there's some common ground here, right? And a lot of these things are big. And so what this allowed, like what Rocky and I to do, is I got to learn his experiences, like how Vietnam impacted him as a young man, how his experience in the military, how he lived with the civil rights movement, you know, all of these different things that he experienced real time and I shared, right? And also the things that happened during my lifetime that really hopefully you get the point. The interesting piece here is that these shared experiences in the middle, I think the more that each generation shares, the easier the assumptions are, right? Like the AIDS crisis. One thing about this slide that's really interesting to me personally is that it's almost on the left side, the baby boomers, these things, they were active agents in, right? They were the acting agents. They decided to go to the moon. They decided to try to liberate women, to participate or to fight the feminist waves. Whereas on the right side of the diagram, we were not decision makers, right? We were receiving, we were participants, but without any kind of agency per se, right? Because your children, you don't have a way to, how are you going to combat the AIDS crisis, right, when you're 12 years old? But that doesn't mean that it didn't seep into the zeitgeist. It doesn't mean that it didn't encode those reactions, those crises, those joys in your spirit, in your experience, right? So the shared experiences between these two kinds of generations allow for an understanding, a level of shorthand, of human shorthand, that is beyond, in some ways, beyond verbal communication. For instance, like the Cold War. I'm having trouble actually conveying to you what it actually meant to be in, to experience daily nuclear not daily, but nuclear fallout drills during school. Now, nuclear fallout drills, that was a common ground there, right, between these two generations. Obviously, the baby boomers decided that this was a way to deal with the situation that they were dealing with, whereas my generation, the idea that you could be instantly vaporized, that everything on Earth could be instantly vaporized, and it was so visceral and so raw that you would practice your death every day, is not, it imprints on the human spirit. And that common ground allows for human shorthand between these two circles, right? That's the idea. Now, the farther that you move away, because here's the kind of where it becomes practical. The farther that you move away from baby boomer generation, who are still in power, to be clear, these individuals are still in power, right? There's obviously nuance there, but they are still shaping, especially the politics around us, right? And the emergence of conservatism, and why that conservatism came on the backs of the baby boomers because of their experiences with past generations, and then the reality of life, and the huge construct of this kind of exponential curve of technology, all of that stuff. Like they're the ones that were adapting and are still trying to adapt in a way. They're just still in charge. Now, in politics, for instance, today's politics, which obviously are tremendously volatile because we're going through an epoch of change, which is my point. The people that are still in charge, I have personally a greater degree of understanding about where they're coming from than as we will see as we move through time. And so we have a more common language than the younger generations. We have a more common experience, right? Now, like I said earlier, I think that the interesting part about this is, as we move through time, what happens, and this is where the debate comes. How do we take these experiences that these baby boomers and the World War II generation especially, because they're the most critical, because there are very few of them left. How do we capture and then crystallize and encapsulate the wisdom and the folly of that generation's zeitgeist for the betterment of mankind? And more importantly, how do we relate to it? The farther away we get from these people, the farther away that a Trumper, baby boomer Trump person is from the zeitgeist of the youth, the harder it is for those individuals to understand. That's the point, right? On a basic level. So this is another jump, right? So we got rid of the Gen Xers because they're the closest to the people in charge. Now again, there's nuance. There are plenty of Gen X individuals that are complicit there are plenty of traitors. What I'm trying to do is encapsulate the touch points, right? Anyway, so the farther we move through time, the fewer and fewer the shared experiences are obviously going to be, right? So when you jump to the next generation, again, all of this is anecdotal, the millennials, the baby boomers and the millennials have far fewer shared experiences to draw upon for understanding. The fewer the things that shape the zeitgeist, the harder it is to understand, the fewer touch points you have. Now, the internet revolution is really fascinating in this, between the baby boomers and the millennials, because that's the product of my generation, really. One of the biggest products was the shared experience, right? like the fall of the Berlin Wall, for instance, sure, that happened when most millennials were, when millennials were alive. Again, this is artificial classifications. But that impacted the zeitgeist different than it did for instance, me. Because the fall of the Berlin Wall was, man, it was euphoric. It felt to me as a child that the world was progressing, that common human experience was going to win the day. Now that happened during the time of these millennial folks, but they were, most of them, I mean, we're talking about 1981, right? As the kind of the metaphorical cutoff point. So again, as we go on, the fewer and fewer kind of touch points we have, the fewer the pieces of the fewer touch points we have. Now, this is the most extreme, because if you start thinking about 60, 70 years difference is what we're talking about, right? And sure, 2013, these folks are, this is their world. As far as I'm concerned, this is their world. But you still have the baby boomers directly impacting their world. So how do you bring common ground to those things, common values, etc.? This is really applicable to politics, because as these Gen Alpha folks begin to take on their political power, because we're still a democracy as of right this second, or we may become a mob later, but this still applies. The mob is going to be, who are they going to be put into the against the wall? It's these baby boomers, right? And various other, yeah. But like I said, if you think about the only big, I mean, obviously this is anecdotal, but from a global standpoint, the climate crisis, sure, both of these, regardless of whether the baby boomers want to admit it or not, it's happening. Science is science. I don't really see much value in talking about that. And then the COVID pandemic. Now, even just that experience, the COVID pandemic, which we have all lived through, how it has impacted us varies greatly. Very greatly. Just like Generation Alpha never experienced nuclear fallout drills, so too did I never experience active shooter drills in my school. Those are two different things that impact the common zeitgeist. So my analysis basically is this. The fewer the shared zeitgeist experiences, the harder it is to assume a person is doing something for a reason, for a relatable reason. The more important it is to use the shared experiences that we do have as a methodology for greater understanding. I frankly cannot fathom, because this is kind of my generation's kind of superpower. That's not the right word, but my generation's not advantage, angle, is that I understand Vietnam veterans, for instance, far more than a Gen Alpha would. And the baby boomers, of course, understand the World War II generation better, in a deeper way. But because we as humans, well, I'll save that for the conclusion. So this slide is really fascinating to me. Like each one of these topics, like we could splinter off into a whole bunch of different things, but you get the point. So I just wanted to kind of go through these slides. Please consume them. I don't really see much value in walking through all of these because each one of these boxes, I mean, just think about the COVID-19 experience. We as a species, we as a nation, we as a local community, we still haven't come to grips with that experience, in spite of the fact that it was a commonality and also, most importantly, that experience changes those people who experience them in a different way because of the zeitgeist that they represent, because of the worldviews that they represent, etc. All right, let's try to bring this home, and this is going to be a long one, whatever. Obviously, I had some brain farts through that, and that's okay. I'm going to leave them in. You understand why, theoretically, if you've listened. So how do I kind of bring this to a conclusion? I'm going to share something that's actually quite personal to me, and I've been blessed with my whole life. I was married once, and now I'm married twice. I have the most beautiful individual that I have a lot to say about my mate, about my wife. She is younger than I am, not terribly younger, but she's definitely a millennial, and I am not. I respect her worldview in a way that is informed by my own past and my own experiences and my own understanding of what is important in life. And our value systems have differences. Now, I'm wise enough to understand and experienced enough to understand that I believe that those differences are actually powerful. And I learn from her every day. I learn from her worldview every day. I learn from what she sees as important and what causes her anxiety every day. And there are differences in what, for instance, our risk tolerances, not our value systems. I could wax eloquent, and I will, I'm sure, about her viewpoints, about her in general. There's no way for me to encapsulate how I feel, but it's real. It's real. What causes her concern, what causes her joy, can be different than I, and that's normal. That's a byproduct of what I'm trying to say in a microcosm. So what I'm trying to draw this together. We talked about this kind of concept in as large a frame as possible, generational frame of zeitgeist. Now, that same concept can be miniaturized or brought to a very granular level about our life experiences as individuals and how we can come together and become stronger because of our differences. I try very hard, actually, to not convince my mate of anything. I can be a very forceful individual, and we are very vulnerable to each other. Well, that's not obvious. Some people don't understand that is one of the building blocks of a real relationship, is not really mutually assured destruction, but certainly vulnerabilities. Vulnerabilities and shared experiences, right? But also a level of, and so my point, I think, is that in today's day and age, we tend to think of differences as being a problem, of differences of opinion, differences of experience set, the Venn diagram of each individual's consciousness. We judge people's worth based upon our internal subjective consciousness and experience. And that is a childlike mentality of the world. That is I don't want to say foolish, but that is an uninformed and it's a dead end for human development. We are living in a time when isolationism and conservatism it's reaped its rewards. It is reaping its rewards. Our nations are at war. We are currently in, as I've said before, what I believe to be the Third World War. Regardless of whether, like I mentioned earlier, if you read Hemingway's work, because most, like, A Farewell to Arms is a tremendous book, a novel, but it reflects its time before the U.S. was at, quote, war, unquote, in the Second World War. But we were. That's kind of the same kind of scenario, right? I mean, we're all in an ecosystem, in the same ecosystem. We're at war. Men and women are dying. Children are dying. Children are being destroyed. Old men are being destroyed. For what? Because of a withdrawing, because of a conservatism, because of a lack of compassion in a real sense. And compassion, in my opinion, also requires vulnerability. What I'm doing here is trying to be vulnerable. I've never talked at length to very few people about some of these concepts, especially not in a more systematic way. It's a vulnerable thing for me. I am scared to death about these videos. They can be used against me in an emotional sense. But that's why I think that there's value to this, and there's value to sharing, and there's value to being vulnerable, and there's value to respecting people that you don't understand. There's wisdom to that. People that you may find as repugnant. That doesn't mean that their experiences are not valid. My own common enemy, the neo-Confederate movements, like I understand them. I try to delve into why that mentality and what it came from, because I have a unique set of shared experiences in that Venn diagram. I am the poster child for some of that stuff. I literally was a poster child for some of that stuff. And that experience has given me insight into why this happens. Why did people put on the red hat when they took off the white hood? Why did it become a populist movement? Such now that we've gone back, we've lost an incalculable amount of progress, of human progress in the United States with the disillusionment of the Voting Rights Act. Like conservatism, well, there's a lot of historical examples as to why that kind of withdrawing from the battlefield, withdrawing from the human, the longing for a simpler time and the seduction of the strong man and the refinement of the religions associated with a certain worldview that is powerful in a political and a global and an economic sense. The demonization of people, I mean, don't get me wrong. Sometimes you got to put a man down. Sometimes that's the case. But you got to do it with respect, and you got to do it with compassion, because we are all Homo sapiens. I mean, you take that to extreme, right? The real monsters of the world, and there are, listen, most people don't understand true evil. They just don't. And that's a good thing. They don't have to. They're not in that Venn diagram. I'm not a gangster. I don't espouse organized crime. I could have. There's nothing intrinsic to me that makes me invulnerable to the seduction of fascism. In fact, the opposite is the case. And I've had some personal and unique experiences that, you know, maybe we'll talk about later. The point of this entire thing is that, again, you don't have to be a part of my Venn diagram for me to respect your humanity. And we have some common ground for an understanding. That does not mean being complicit. That does not mean a reduction in my vitriol associated with these individuals. That means just human understanding. You know, I study human combative behavior, hoplology, as we've talked about before, and this is one of the biggest lessons that medieval chivalric culture can give to the participant, to the combatant, to the knights. Like, martial cultures are to keep men and women from becoming mad animals. And one of those things in the medieval sense is, you know, the furious wheel, the concept of the furious wheel, or, well, you know, there's a very modern reenactment kind of definition of the furious wheel for a lot of good reasons by some really great authors, modern authors. I'm sure I'll reference them later. In fact, I'm going to reference some of them directly, because credit where credit's due. But the concept of today it's you, tomorrow it's me, and I will strike you down and love you for it. There's some deep meaning there. There's some wisdom. There's some pragmatic wisdom there. The ability for courteous behavior, the way of the court, right? Courtesy. You know, the modern-ish examples are the practical modern examples are gone, or were being removed. Like when even some of our politicians, well, one of our politicians said, "Walk softly and carry a big stick." That'd be perfect for a TikTok video. But that doesn't mean you would understand that phrase with a TikTok video or with the phrase itself. It's shorthand for common ground, right? This is the point. Our common ground is shrinking as we generationally move apart, and as my lifespan progresses and my understanding of the world progresses. We become clearinghouses for humanity. That's what being wise means in some ways. That's what being an older person with experience means. That doesn't mean that you should limit the experiences and the exuberance and the expression of youth. It's the opposite. But also, it means that we have a responsibility to share in an effective manner with zeitgeist that we don't necessarily understand. And we won't unless we invest in those common grounds, unless we really try to understand. That doesn't mean acquiesce. That doesn't mean agree. It means understand. That's what I'm calling for. And that's, I'm trying to put my money where my mouth is with these videos. And like I said, nobody's watching them, and that's okay. That's not up to me. That's not what this is about. But I'm just trying to be honest and vulnerable, and with the understanding and expectation that that vulnerability is a gift, regardless of whether that's understood or not. Anyway, this was not as elegant or eloquent as I wanted, but it's going to have to be. And just like the Rosetta Stone, some of those marks on that stone probably weren't exactly perfect either. Well, they weren't, but they did have impact. So I hope you have a good day today, and I hope you experience your life to its fullest. And I hope someday that we humans will develop the wisdom of compassion for each other, especially on an individual level, but also on the largest of scales. Having compassion, for instance, for the future people that we cannot even understand what the world will even look like in the next 5 years, 2 years. We have no idea what those individuals will be born into. And to some extent, we have very, very the farther back in time, the less and less we have of common ground with our fellow Homo sapiens. That's why things like cave drawings, cave paintings are so valuable. That's why scientists and anthropologists fixate so much on, well, this bone has this mark, or the clues to humanity, the concept of these humans 30,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago, putting their mark, placing their hands on the solid earth and making their mark. That's a direct connection with you if you're Homo sapien. It's useful, it's usable. You gain wisdom in that continuity of human spirit, and you can extrapolate that wisdom to the future. And that's the goal. Because we humans have, in order for us to survive, we have to gain wisdom to match our ability to destroy each other and our environment around us. That's not really debate. It just is. And in order to do that, we need to find these common ground, these of the Venn diagrams of each other, both as individuals, but also in the largest of scales. So, yeah, on that note, I hope you have a good day. That's my biggest wish.